lecture. We extend a warm welcome to all the participants and invited guests. Um, let's begin this lecture with a moment of silence. Thank you. I request Father Ajit Kurian, Principal, St. Berchmans College, to welcome the audience. Over to you, Father.
Thank you, Nitin. Dear and respected Professor Noam Chomsky, Dr. Joseph Job, Dr. Anthony Matthews, and Reverend Dr. Teddy Kanyu Parambil, our Vice Principals, Professor P.J. Thomas, former teachers, invited guests, other dignitaries, and my dear colleagues and dear students. Good evening to Professor Noam Chomsky and good morning to others. I feel delighted to welcome everyone to this special lecture to honor Professor P.J. Thomas, head of the Department of English, who is retiring this month, and which is organized by the Department of English, St. Berchmans College, Changanassery. We are really honored to have with us once again one of the most influential public intellectuals in the world, Professor Noam Chomsky, whose presence is a source of great pride to our college. Previously, Professor Chomsky had delivered the 34th C.A. Shepherd Memorial Lecture, which was a highly esteemed event within the Department of English. We are grateful for his willingness to share his expertise and knowledge with us once again. I extend my sincere and utmost pleasure in welcoming Professor Noam Chomsky to our college. It is an honor for us to have such a renowned American linguist among us. I'm confident that Professor P.J. Thomas will do the honors of introducing him to our esteemed audience who have joined us from far and wide. This momentous occasion would not have been possible without the graciousness and generosity of Professor Noam Chomsky, and we express our heartfelt gratitude to him for accepting our invitation to deliver this special lecture. On behalf of the entire Berchmans community, I extend a warm welcome to you, Professor Chomsky, to this program.
Thank you.
I also cordially welcome our Vice Principals, Dr. Joseph Job, Dr. Anthony Matthews, Reverend Dr. Teddy Kanyu Parambil, other professors, heads of the departments, teachers from neighboring colleges, and those who are virtually connected to this function. Last but not the least, I would like to extend a warm welcome to all the participants and my dear students to this event. Welcoming you all once again, I remain. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. We extend a warm welcome to you for this program, to this program as well. May I request Professor Peter Thomas to introduce the speaker? Over to you, sir.
Good evening, Professor Chomsky, and good morning, all the participants. Let me also welcome you all to this special lecture. I want to apologize that we are a bit late to start. I hope you understand the glitches and the delays caused. So, you know that Professor Chomsky's time is now 8:30 p.m. In fact, it's a little late for him. So he is up just to give this talk for us. So I don't want to delay that further. And I just want to say that it's impossible to introduce Professor Chomsky rather than saying he needs no introduction. So one who has been in the academy for more than 5 decades and has written more than 150 books, innumerable articles. And so his influence is something that is indispensable to in knowledge today. And therefore, I can only say, borrowing an Indian expression, that Chomsky is neti neti. I mean, not this and not that. So it's very difficult to kind of catch him where he is. He's in social sciences or humanities, or in philosophy, in linguistics. So his influence is all over. I think he is the most cited scholar living today in the world. So, well, well, you all know him, and what I always find unique about Professor Chomsky is that he has combined political activism with academic work. Where there is a denial of justice or a curtailment of freedom, he is there, giving a small clip, a talk, or an article. So we simply salute you, Professor Chomsky, for the work you have done to make this world a little better, at least. So your influence will be eternal. So I'm personally I'm personally thankful to you for accepting this invitation. You are so kind, and you're so democratic in your ways. So we all appreciate your kindness. And as Professor, our principal mentioned, this is the second time that he's coming. It's a real honor for our department and for the college. And thank you profusely for this generous gesture. So today, let me welcome and invite Professor Chomsky to give this very, very fascinating lecture on the corporate war on science, from tobacco to Silicon Valley. So I hope you'll all enjoy. And thank you, Professor Chomsky, for joining. Over to you. Now you can start.
Thank you. I'm sure you have all been reading the enormous excitement these days about the remarkable progress in artificial intelligence. The lead columnist of the New York Times, Thomas Friedman, proclaimed in awe that with the appearance of chatbots, we are entering what he called a Promethean moment. All of civilization is going to change radically. Others contemplate a frightening future in which machines will be so super intelligent that they will take over the world and reduce us to slaves, if they tolerate us at all. More narrowly, the normally sober London economist warned ominously that the whole of the study of language and cognition will have to be abandoned if it cannot respond to this powerful refutation of all that it has done for many years. Thousands of the leading figures working in AI, artificial intelligence, recently released a statement urging a moratorium on the development of these systems because, I'm now quoting, AI systems with human competitive intelligence can pose profound risks to society and to humanity, as shown by extensive research and as acknowledged by top AI labs, as stated in the widely endorsed Asilomar AI principles. Advanced AI could represent a profound change in the history of life on Earth and should be planned for and managed with commensurate care and resources. Some of the most highly respected scientists have warned that this is perhaps the most extreme threat that humans have ever faced. So it seems serious indeed and worth looking at carefully. That's what I'd like to do. I should say at once to start that it is possible, in principle, that artificial systems could be created that have these awesome consequences. However, I will keep here to a narrower question. Is what is possible in principle, even on the remote horizon? And with regard to what is, in fact, even on the remote horizon, does it come even close to the threats to human survival posed by the two crises that are well known, the rising threat of terminal nuclear war and imminent destruction of organized human life on Earth by continued fossil fuel use? To anticipate, I think, the answers to both questions is a resounding no. To explain why, I'll have to resort to a moderately technical account of the issues and of what has been achieved. I'd also like to place these critical questions within a context that hasn't been considered in this connection, but that I think may be useful and appropriate. The context is the war on science that has been underway for a century and has now become a component of the more general collapse of the arena of rational discourse, manifested in many ways: fake news, disinformation, disparagement of fact and argument, denial of truth, and so on. I think all of this should be seen as part of the general social disorder that has been engendered by the neoliberal assault on society in the past 40 years, with dire effects almost everywhere. They're very significant topics. I'll have to leave them in the background in these remarks. For a century, society has been plagued by massive corporate campaigns to encourage disdain for science, topics that incidentally are well studied in the scholarly literature. Began about a century ago with corporations whose products are murderous, lead, tobacco, asbestos, later fossil fuels. Corporate motives are understandable. The goal of a business in a capitalist society is profit, not human welfare. That's an institutional fact. If you don't play that game, you're out, replaced by someone who will. Nothing new about this. It was recognized 250 years ago in the early days of modern state capitalism by Adam Smith. He recognized that those who own the economy, those he called the masters of mankind, in his words, they pursue their vile maxim: all for ourselves, nothing for anyone else. In furtherance of this goal, the masters use their economic power to take over government. In Adam Smith's words, to become the principal architects of government policy, in this way to ensure that their own interests are most peculiarly attended to, no matter how grievous the impact on the people of their own country, even worse, on the victims of their savage injustice abroad. Smith, of course, was thinking particularly of India, of England, and its savage injustice in India, which was then in its early stages, but it was already despoiling the richest country on earth, was turning dearth into famine, as Adam Smith pointed out, stealing India's more advanced technology, imposing radical violation of market principles to ensure deindustrialization and general misery, apart from a small group of wealthy collaborators. Don't have to tell you about that. Actually, Smith's critique is a little too strong. An absolute ruler can afford to provide some benefits to the population, but in competitive capitalism, that option is ruled out for the reasons I mentioned. You either play the game or you're out. Either pursue the vile maxim or you're finished. To be sure, popular forces can impose constraints on pursuit of the vile maxim. And if you look over history, state capitalism has varied in its modes of exploitation and repression over the last couple hundred years, but the basic structure remains much as Adam Smith outlined 250 years ago. Well, these, however, are topics to be elaborated in a different discussion. Let's turn to the problem that the masters of mankind faced a century ago. Scientific inquiry was beginning to show that their products were in fact lethal. Now we come to the institutional rules. These rules dictate that if one business expends resources to overcome the threats, it'll tend to be displaced by others who devote themselves to marketing lethal products. Again, lead paint, asbestos, tobacco, fossil fuels. Follows at once that the prime task of the corporate sector was to try to find ways to discredit the scientific challenge. Corporate leaders recognized at once that it would be a mistake to deny the mounting evidence of the lethal effects of their products, though that would be quickly refuted. A better approach is to sow doubt, to concentrate on the uncertainty of all inquiry, to encourage contempt for those scientists who try to tell us how to run our affairs. For concreteness, let me just give you one typical case that I happened to witness in Massachusetts, where I lived, in Boston. Paint contractors were gathered to hear a decision by the Environmental Protection Agency banning lead paint, which was killing many children. The reaction was interesting and understandable. Why should we pay attention to this elite liberal in a suit who's never painted a house in his life, but comes down from Washington to tell me not to use lead paint, which I know from experience is the best paint and the best for my business? Corporate sector joins in to help by producing reams of propaganda about uncertainty, doubt, government overreach, attacking our liberty, and so on. Huge campaigns, and they've worked quite well. Right now, they are leading us on a path to destruction of organized human life on Earth, referring to the fossil fuel industry, not an exaggeration. Well, in intellectual circles, similar effects have been produced by the postmodern critique of science. That's been effectively dismantled by Jean Berchmans, Alan Sokal, without much effect, still alive in some circles. Well, may perhaps be unkind to suggest the question, but it is, I think, fair to ask whether the same baleful consequences are given a stimulus by the exorbitant pronouncements of the AI community and those who uncritically repeat and even amplify their careless proclamations. Worth keeping in mind, I think. With that as background, let's now have a look at the state of the art in developing intelligent machines. I'll actually be focusing on language, chatbots, and the like, but the reach is much broader. First, we should start off by clarifying the notion machine. In the present context, machine means a program, software. What's a program? A program is basically a theory written in notation that can be executed by a computer. So the question is, what kind of theories have been developed? We can make a rough distinction between pure engineering and science. There's no sharp boundary, but it's quite a good first approximation. Pure engineering seeks to produce a product that may be of some use. Science seeks understanding. If the topic is human intelligence, cognitive capacities of other organisms, science seeks theoretical understanding of these biological systems, explanation of why they are this way, and crucially, not some other way. That's science, rational inquiry in general. The founders of artificial intelligence, Alan Turing, Herbert Simon, Marvin Minsky, and others, regarded it as science. For them, I knew some of them, for them it was part of the, at that time, emerging cognitive sciences, form of cognitive science that was trying to make use of new technologies that were developing, discoveries in the mathematical theory of computation to advance understanding. Over the years, these concerns have faded. They have been largely displaced by an engineering orientation. The earlier concerns are now commonly dismissed, sometimes condescendingly, dismissed as what's called go-fi, good old-fashioned AI, not for us. Well, let's go on. Is it likely that programs of the kind that programs will be devised anywhere within sight that surpass human capabilities? I have to be a little careful about the word capabilities for reasons to which I'll return. But if we take capabilities to refer to human performance, then the answer is definitely yes. Surely programs will be devised that surpass human performance. In fact, they have long existed. The calculator in your laptop, for example, can far exceed what humans can do, if only because of lack of time, lack of memory. What about closed systems like chess? Was well understood in the 1950s. I recall the discussions about this in the laboratory where I worked where the internet and computers and AI were being developed. It was well understood 70 years ago that sooner or later a program could be devised to defeat a grand master who's playing with a bound on memory and time. The achievement years later was pretty much public relations for IBM. Furthermore, many biological organisms surpass human capacity in much deeper ways. I happen to live in the desert. The desert ants in my backyard have minuscule brains. Hardly takes a microscope to see them, but they far exceed human capacities in many domains. Navigation, for example. The human organism cannot reach the cognitive capacities of these tiny creatures, just as a dog or a chimpanzee cannot acquire a language. Organisms have their specific capacities, sometimes with common roots that may be deeply embedded back tens of millions of years. But organisms are not ranked as smarter or dumber, better or worse. There's no great chain of being with humans at the top. The products of AI engineering are being used in many fields, for better or for worse. Even simple ones can be quite useful. In the language area, programs that you have on your computers, like autofill, fills in phrases that maybe you're going to write next, sometimes helpful, or live transcription, or Google Translate, among others. With vastly greater computing power, much more sophisticated programming, there should be other useful applications. Sometimes they might even be useful for the sciences. There already have been some, assisting in the study of protein folding is one recent case where massive and rapid search technology has helped scientists to deal with a critical and recalcitrant problem. Full or harmful? Both questions arise in the case of engineering AI, contemporary AI. Current work with large language models, LLMs as they're called, including chatbots, might turn out to have some utility. It's not obvious, but they might. The harm, on the other hand, is apparent. They provide tools for disinformation, for defamation, for misleading the uninformed, who are deluded into taking these systems as real, ask them important questions with dangerous effects. These threats are enhanced when LLMs are combined with artificial images and replication of voice. Such cases have already been attested. As I mentioned, with different concerns in mind, leading practitioners have called for a moratorium on further development. As always, possible benefits of technology have to be weighed against potential costs. That's all about engineering AI. Quite different questions arise when we turn to AI and science. Here, caution is necessary because of exorbitant and reckless claims, often amplified in the media, such as those I quoted. To clarify the issues, Let's consider some concrete cases, some of them hypothetical, some real. I mentioned insect navigation, which is in fact an astonishing achievement. Been studied by insect scientists for many years. They've made a good deal of progress in learning how this great achievement is obtained. The neurophysiology, which is a very different matter, remains elusive. Evolution of the systems, almost nothing is known. Same is true of the amazing feats of birds. Sea turtles travel thousands of miles, unerringly return to the place of origin. Well, that's science. Let's suppose some person, let's call him Tom Jones, a proponent of engineering and AI. Suppose he comes along and says, your work has all been refuted. The problem is solved. Commercial airline pilots achieve the same, sometimes even better results all the time. If we'd either bother to respond, we'd simply laugh. Well, take something human, the seafaring exploits of Polynesians, still alive among Aboriginal tribes in Australia and Polynesia. They use stars, wind, currents to land their canoes at a designated spot hundreds of miles away. That too has been the topic of much research to find out how they do it. But our Tom Jones has the answer. Stop wasting your time. Naval vessels do it all the time. Same response. Laughter or ridicule. Let's turn to a real case. Language acquisition. It's been the topic of extensive, highly illuminating research in recent years. Many results. They show that infants have very rich knowledge of the language or languages around them, far beyond what they exhibit in performance. It's achieved with very little evidence. Some crucial cases, no evidence at all. At best, as careful statistical studies have shown, available data are sparse, particularly when rank frequency is taken into account, what's called Zipf's law in technical terms. Well, enter Tom Jones again. You've been refuted, paying no attention to your discoveries, LLMs that scan astronomical amounts of data can find statistical regularities that make it possible to simulate the data on which they are being trained, producing something that looks pretty much like normal human behavior, chatbots in short. This case differs from the others. First, it's real, not hypothetical. Second, people don't laugh. In fact, many are awed, as I quoted. Third, unlike the hypothetical cases, the actual results are far from what's claimed. This, incidentally, is the delusion that misled the London Economist. These considerations bring up a minor problem with the current large language model enthusiasm. The minor problem is its total absurdity, as in the hypothetical cases where we recognize it at once. But there are much more serious problems than absurdity. One is that the large language models are designed in such a way that they cannot, in principle, tell us anything about language, learning, or other aspects of cognition. That's a matter of principle, irremediable, built into the design. Suppose we double the astronomical of data scanned, go from 50 terabytes to 100 terabytes. Suppose we add another trillion parameters. Suppose we use even more of California's energy. It's already a huge waste. We do all those things, the simulation of behavior is sure to improve. And at the same time, the improvement will reveal more clearly the failure in principle to yield any understanding. The reason is elementary. The systems work just as well with impossible languages that infants cannot acquire as with those that infants acquire quickly and virtually reflexively. It's as if a biologist were to come along and say, I have a great new theory of organisms. It lists many organisms that exist, many that can't possibly exist, and I can't tell you anything about the distinction. Well, again, we'd laugh, or we should. Let's shift attention from absurdity and failure in principle to normal science. Here's where matters become interesting. Think about it, even a single example of language acquisition can yield rich insight into the distinction between possible and impossible languages. The reasons are quite straightforward. All of growth and development, including the parts that are called learning, all of it is a process that begins with the state of the organism, transforms it step by step to later stages. Acquisition of language, of course, is such a process. The state from which it begins, the initial state, is the biological endowment of the human faculty of language. Obviously, that exists. Plainly, there must be a biological endowment for the human faculty of language. That's the merest truism. In the case of language, like most other growth processes, transition proceeds to a relatively stable state, changed only superficially beyond. The stable state is knowledge of the language coded in the brain. External data trigger, partially shape the process. We can study the state attained. We can study the external data. By doing so, we can draw far-reaching conclusions about the initial state, the biological endowment that makes language acquisition possible, which we can, in fact, think of as a technical terms as a mapping from data provided to state attained. The conclusions about the initial state impose a distinction between possible and impossible languages. The distinction holds for all of those who share the initial state. In empirical fact, that turns out to be all humans as far as is known. There seems to be no difference in capacity to acquire a language among existing human groups. Well, all of this is normal science. It's achieved many results. Experiment has shown that the stable state is substantially obtained very early on, by 3 to 4 years of age. The child's knowledge at that age far exceeds its performance. can be shown by experiment. It's also been well established that the faculty of language has basic properties that are specific to humans, hence shared by humans, common to all human groups, unique to humans, a true species property. Well, a good deal is left out in this schematic account, notably the role of natural law in growth and development, always a major factor. In the case of a computational system like language, the form of natural law that is most effective are the principles of computational efficiency, which turn out to teach you a lot when you begin to look into how these achievements are made. Acquisition of language by an infant, use of language. Well, even leaving that out, that's the essence of the matter. That's all normal science. Very important to be clear about a distinction that dates back to Aristotle, the distinction between possession of knowledge and use of knowledge. Contemporary terminology, some of you know, it's called competence and performance. In the language case, the stable state that's obtained, coded in the brain, is possession of knowledge. It's an internal system that determines an unbounded array of structured expressions, each of which we can regard as formulating a thought, each of them externalizable in some sensory motor medium. It's usually sound, could be sign, even with some difficulty, touch. It's not really part of language. It's a system that's been there millions of years, hundreds of thousands, often millions of years before language developed, has not changed since language emerged. It's just the way of externalizing the inner system in some sensory motor medium. Well, this internally coded system is accessed in the use of knowledge in performance. Performance comes in many varieties. One form of performance is the internal use of language and thought, reflection, planning, recollection, great deal more. Statistically speaking, by far the overwhelming use of language. It is inaccessible to introspection. Can't look inside and see what's happening. We can learn a lot about it by the normal methods of science from the outside, metaphorically speaking, rather the way we learn about another huge human nervous system. It's called the enteric nervous system, sometimes called the gut brain. It's very much like the system that's up here. Huge number of neurons, lots of computation, even suffers from the disabilities of the brain and the head, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and so on. We can't introspect into what it does, but we can learn a lot about it from the outside by the normal methods of science. And the same is true of the mental activities taking place in the brain that's in the head. That's, again, normal science. There is something called inner speech. It's not inner speech. In fact, it's fragments of external language with the articulatory apparatus muted. It's only a remote reflection of the internal functions of language. They're important matters I can't pursue right now. Well, that's the main use of language, internal thought. Other forms of use of language are perception, in computer science called parsing, perception and parsing, and production. Perception, parsing, is an input-output system. Data in, result out. That's the kind of system we know how to study. So there is extensive study of perception of speech, natural language processing, it's called in the computer sciences. Well, what about production? That's a very different matter. When we're speaking, producing speech, we somehow select one of the infinitely many options that are made available by the internal language. How we do this, no one has any idea. The question remains as mysterious to us today as it was when it was regarded with awe and amazement by Galileo and his contemporaries at the dawn of modern science. They considered one of the most amazing phenomena of the world, Galileo and others. They expressed their awe and amazement at something they regarded as truly miraculous, the fact that with a finite number of symbols, we can somehow construct an infinite number, an unbounded number of linguistically formulated thoughts, and we can even convey to others who have no access to our minds the innermost workings of our minds. That, they thought correctly, is a remarkable fact about the world. Galileo himself regarded the alphabet as the most spectacular of human inventions because it gave a means to record this phenomenon. Well, how it happens was mysterious to them, same for us. Actually, it's a special case, a very especially interesting case of a general problem of voluntary action, which also has simpler cases like how I decide to lift my finger, say. Two of the leading scientists who study voluntary motion recently wrote an article on the state of the art, one of the major scientific journals. As they put it, fancifully, as they say, we are coming to understand the puppet and the strings, but the puppeteer remains elusive. Can't say anything about it. Well, the principal goal of science is to discover the internal system, both its initial state in the human genetically determined faculty of language, and in the particular forms it assumes in the course of acquisition. To the extent that we understand the internal system, we can proceed to investigate how it enters into performance, interacting with many other factors that enter into use of language. Data of performance provide evidence about the nature of the internal system, just as they do about the gut brain or any other internal system of the organism. That's, of course, particularly the case when data of performance, observed data, are refined by experiment. That's done in standard field work. Somebody working with a tribe in the Amazon. But even the most massive collection of data is necessarily misleading in crucial ways. It keeps to what is normally produced, not the knowledge of the language coded in the brain, which is the primary object under investigation for those who want to understand the nature of language and its use. Again, that internal object determines infinitely many possibilities of a kind that'll never be used in normal behavior because of factors that are irrelevant to language. Short-term memory, for example, topic studied 60 years ago, and many other factors. Furthermore, the data that's observed will also include much that lies outside the system coded in the brain. Some cases, conscious use of language in ways that violate the rules for rhetorical purposes. It's not an unusual literary device. These are truisms known to all field workers who use what are called elicitation techniques with informants, basically experiments, to yield a refined corpus that excludes irrelevant restrictions and deviant expressions. Same is true when linguists use themselves as informants. It's perfectly sensible and normal procedure, common in the history of psychology in general up to the present, all normal science. Well, proceeding further with normal science, we find again that the internal processes and elements of language cannot be detected by inspection of observed phenomena. Often these elements do not even appear in speech or in writing, though they have effects, often subtle effects, which can be detected. That's another reason why restriction to observed phenomena, as in the large language model approaches, sharply limits understanding of the internal processes that are the core objects of inquiry into the nature of language, acquisition and use of language. Of course, none of this is relevant if concern for science and understanding has been abandoned in favor of pure engineering. Well, more generally in the sciences, for millennia, conclusions have been reached by experiments. What is an experiment? Often thought experiments, just carried out in the mind, like most of Galileo's, up till the present. Each experiment is a radical departure from phenomena. That's why people carry out experiments, to abstract from phenomena, try to home in on the elements that are significant. Experiments are, of course, theory-driven. They seek to discard the innumerable irrelevant factors that enter into observed phenomena like linguistic performance. All of this is so elementary that it's rarely even discussed. And of course, familiar. As I mentioned, the basic distinction goes back to Aristotle's distinction between possession of knowledge and use of knowledge. The former is the central object of study. There are secondary, quite serious studies that investigate how the internally stored system of knowledge is used in performance, along with the many non-linguistic factors that enter into what is directly observed. Well, we might also recall an observation of evolutionary biologist Theodore Berchmans, famous primarily for his work with Drosophila fruit flies. As he pointed out, each species is unique, and humans are the uniquest of all. If we're interested in understanding what kind of creatures we are, following the injunction of the Delphic oracle 2,500 years ago, know thyself. If we're interested in that, we will be primarily concerned with what makes humans the uniquest of all. At its root, I think, are language and thought, closely intertwined, if even distinguishable. It was recognized in a long tradition going back to classical Greece, classical India, 2,500 years ago. Most behavior is fairly routine, hence fairly predictable. What provides real insight into what makes us unique is what is not routine. We can find that sometimes by experiment, sometimes by observation, observing normal children, all the way up to great artists and scientists. It's in these areas that we can hope to gain real insight into the strange creature that has so radically changed the earth during its brief sojourn on earth in this beautiful and highly vulnerable place. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chomsky. Sir, there are a few questions in the chat box. Would you mind commenting on one or two?
Would you like me to talk about the questions that are there? Yeah.
Nathan, why don't you chat with him so that
I can see the questions.
okay.
Can you all see them?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
should I read them?
Yes.
Just point to them. Well, the first question. Well, the first question makes the assumption that in the future, machines might overpower and replace almost all aspects of life. That's pure fantasy. As I said, in principle, it's impossible. It's possible. You think about it as a possible, as a possibility, yes, could happen. Lots of things are possible in principle, but this is not even remotely on the horizon, not even remotely. And the current forms of AI are designed to ensure that we'll never get there. As I said, they are currently designed as pure engineering, which is carrying us in a different direction, not in the direction of understanding anything. Maybe some useful products, different maybe harmful ones, but not moving in the direction. So basically the question doesn't arise. Can't talk about the role of an ideal teacher facilitator in a situation which we can barely imagine. I mean, you can think about it the way you can think about science fiction or something, but don't think it's very useful. Second question, I'll read it. How will AI impact language and literature? Would AI replace the human component in writing and literature for good? Should we let that happen? Same point. It's not even remotely on the horizon. And in fact, the current systems are moving in the opposite direction. What the current systems do is, to put it in a simple phrase, is basically high-tech plagiarism. They scan enormous amounts of data, astronomical amounts, find statistical regularities, can use them to make a fairly plausible prediction about what word might come next in routine use of language after a certain sequence of words. It has nothing to do with literature or writing or anything else. Of course, it can produce something that looks like literature. I can do that. I could take a story of Tolstoy's, copy it. I've produced a work of art. Yeah. In fact, if you go to a museum, any good museum, you'll see skilled art students sitting carefully in front of paintings by masters and trying to meticulously duplicate them. If you're very skilled, you can do that very well. In fact, so the question, it was a question whether we should let it happen is maybe worth thinking about, but it's so remote from reality that it's not a very high priority. 3, is it really the smart advanced machines which have the potential to cause a catastrophe or the demise and deterioration of morals, value, and an honor code and ethics of living among humans? They don't even address that question. It's not there. It's like asking, could an airplane eliminate the capacity of insects to navigate? No, it has nothing to do with it. It's a totally different domain. So there are no, remember, what you're talking about machines, you're just talking about theories. The computer on your desk is a paperweight, basically, big paperweight, apart from the fact that it can implement a program. Other than that, it's just an object. The program is a theory. The kinds of theories that are being developed in engineering AI are basically simulation. They don't have anything to do with creativity, with morals, ethics, anything else. This is all Silicon Valley propaganda. 4th, would AI over time become so powerful that it will pose a threat rather than being a boon from technology and to humans? Same story. In principle, it's possible. In principle, lots of things are possible. Is it anywhere even near the horizons of research? No. In fact, engineering AI is putting it farther from the horizons of research by moving in a different direction. And in fact, right now, even the things that are around, like say chatbots, are posing a threat to humans. As I mentioned, they're very effective for defamation, disinformation, gullibility. There are attested cases where people think they're real. You're deluded into thinking that this thing you're writing to is real. You ask it questions, should I leave my family? You get an answer. Pay attention to it. It's a total disaster. There are cases like that. In fact, there are even cases of people who talk to the things like Alexa and Siri, these things that you ask questions of, and are deluded into thinking that they're real and listen to the answers. It's pretty serious. And disinformation and defamation are going to be major issues in the future. You can be sure of that. You can now take a chatbot that will simulate what some person might have written or might say somewhere. You can add to it an artificial voice of that person. You can put an artificial image of the face of that person. You can put it on the internet. It'll look pretty much like that person saying some totally imbecilic thing. In fact, there already are cases, and it's only barely beginning. Any good engineer knows how to do this. And you can be sure that malicious operators will be doing plenty of it. Pretty soon, states will be doing it. This is already, even these devices that have basically almost no intellectual interest can cause tremendous harm. It's not remote. We're up to 5. How would future technologies like access to infinite source of an energy, star energy, humans fused with machines as cyborgs, change the ethos of current capitalistic neoliberal ideas, referring to any source of energy, technology, which tends to infinity. Hence, no profit can be made. Well, I would put aside the part about humans fused with machines as cyborgs. That's science fiction. But as accessing unbounded access to energy is not inconceivable. The sun, for example, has basically limitless amounts of energy. That's why solar energy is such a valuable method of moving to overcome the climate crisis. Now, that can undoubtedly be greatly improved. In fact, it's been enormously improved just in the last couple of years. My wife and I have solar panels on the roof. But a couple of years ago, we put them in. They're now completely outdated. You can get much cheaper and better ones. The price and quality of solar panel technology is increasing very fast. It's mostly happening in China, overwhelmingly. That's why the United States is at war with China, commercial war, to try to prevent Chinese technology from developing. That's what it is, openly. It's not a secret. We can't compete with them. We therefore have to keep them from developing. Keep them from developing, even though they're far in the lead in electrification, solar energy, wind technology. Make sure that they don't get ahead of us in trying to save the world from destruction. That's happening right in front of your eyes. I'm not making that one up. That's not science fiction. That's official US policy. But could this, say, tapping the energy of the sun, how far could it go? Maybe much farther than we can now realize. That's not inconceivable. Here we're talking about something potentially real, could be extremely important, which we could move to advance. And of course, we know how to do it. The way to do it is by cooperation, exactly the way it's done in a research lab. I've spent most of my life in research labs at MIT, the main science technology university in the world. A good research lab does not consist of people competing with one another or trying to prevent the guy next to them from getting anywhere by, say, wrecking his equipment. That's not the way a research lab functions. It functions by cooperation. Somebody makes a discovery, great, let's see if we can improve it. Not, let's prevent him from doing it. Well, that generalizes to the international domain. What we should be working for is accommodation, cooperation, working together to solve problems that have to be solved in the next couple of decades, or else we'll simply be finished. I don't have to tell you about India. You know it better than I do, of course. You know that there are peasants in Rajasthan living in huts who are trying to survive nearly 50 degrees Celsius, of course, with no air conditioners. I think last figures I saw, 8% of the population in India has air conditioners. India is going to be unlivable. So will all of South Asia, unless these problems are overcome soon. And they can be by mutual support and accommodation. To destroy what's being done by the researcher in the next lab, current policy, okay? These are serious problems, very serious. Sixth, if the human brain is far superior to AI, why fear AI? Well, it depends what kind of AI we should fear AI because it's where it's harmful, like in the cases I mentioned. Then of course you fear it, try to control it. But AI is neither superior nor inferior to the human brain. Engineering AI is not on the spectrum. It's not trying to be inferior or superior. Serious AI, the kind that's been abandoned, the AI that, say, Alan Turing was interested in, serious theories of understanding, cognition, language, no reason to fear them. They'll lead to better understanding of what kinds of creatures we are. They may lead to the development of much better technologies. There's plenty of technology already available that's way beyond what I can do. Just the calculator and the laptop, the sun panels on my roof, can all do things I can't possibly do. If AI can produce such things, we should all welcome it. Who cares, you know? It's very good. It's good to have things that go beyond human capacity, like those I mentioned. If there are more of them, so what do you think is the future of AI? Will it disappear as a fad? Depends what kind of AI. If AI is pure engineering AI, it'll probably continue, can do a lot of things. You can get better systems that help in life transcription, or that can help scientists, as in the protein co-folding case, where you are using the capacity of very rapid computation with huge masses of data to find patterns that humans wouldn't be able to find. Protein folding is a case in point. You can do that. I hope it doesn't disappear. Can be very useful. If what's called symbolic AI, good old-fashioned AI, if that's undertaken again, could provide much assistance to the understanding of systems of nature like human intelligence, and maybe help in the development of the kind of technology that would be very valuable for us. So I think the question is, what are we going to do with we have the technology, at least the beginnings of it, massive computing ability. Unfortunately, it's very destructive of energy at the moment, but maybe that can be overcome. That can be like any technology, can be used for good, used for bad. This kind of technology could even be part of science. if it's pursued with that goal in mind. Seems to be.
Professor Chomsky, would you be willing to wait 5 minutes for the vote of thanks? Yes, 5 minutes.
No, before that, we will give that virtual presentation of the gift.
Okay, sure, sir. Over to you, sir.
I'll take 1 second. So, Professor Chomsky, I'm sure that, but for COVID and your age, you'd have come to SB to give this lecture. So, but as mark of our respect and gratitude, we would love to give you a virtual gift. In fact, it is a screenshot of your last lecture that you made, you gave for us. So just see the picture painting. So one artist has painted your screenshot. So we will send this to you, and I hope you will accept it and appreciate it. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Professor Chomsky, thank you so much for this fascinating and informative lecture, and for generously spending your time for the Q&A session as well. Professor Chomsky, esteemed guests, dear teachers, and my dear participants, it gives me immense pleasure to express my sincere gratitude and offer a vote of thanks on behalf of the Department of English, St. Berchmans College, Minnesota. We were honored to have with us the world-renowned linguist and influential public intellectual, Professor Noam Chomsky. We express our heartfelt gratitude to Professor Chomsky for sharing his knowledge and expertise with us through this special lecture. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
We extend our warm appreciation to our manager, Reverend Dr. James Palakel, to our vice principals, Dr. Joseph Job, Dr. Anthony Matthews, and Reverend Dr. Teddy C. Andapani, our former professors, head of the departments, teachers from neighboring colleges, and all those who have joined us virtually for this event. We deeply appreciate your valuable presence and contribution to this program. Also, my thanks to our students who actively participated in this program and made this program a great success. And we hope that this lecture has provided you with an enriching and informative experience. Once again, I extend our gratitude to everyone who made this program possible. We hope this program has enriched your knowledge and understanding. Thank you very much. For the attention of the participants,